Grant tossed the divorce papers onto the mahogany table, right next to the beef Wellington I had spent 4 hours preparing. He looked at me with pity, claiming he needed a partner to uplift his empire, not a housewife. I didn't scream. I simply picked up his Montblanc pen, signed the dotted line, and smiled. As the ink dried, I cut his access to the $2 billion that had secretly funded his entire existence. My name is Kara Windermere, though for the last 5 years, the high society of Manhattan has known me only as the invisible shadow trailing behind the great Grant Holloway, standing at the threshold of the grand ballroom in the 6-star St. Regis Hotel. I smoothed the fabric of my simple navy dress, a garment that cost less than the floral arrangements adorning a single table. The air inside was thick, a suffocating blend of expensive cologne, stale champagne, and the metallic tang of ambition. This was the 5th anniversary gala for Nebula Systems, the night my husband was supposed to be celebrated as the new king of the tech world. To everyone else in this gilded cage, I was the lucky one. I was the mousy housewife who had somehow snagged the most eligible bachelor in New York before he made his billions. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in. They were not looks of admiration. They were glances of confusion and thinly veiled disdain, the kind reserved for a stain on a silk tablecloth. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. Keeping my head down, I could hear the whispers ripple through the crowd like a virus. "Is that her?" a woman in a silver sequined gown murmured, hiding her mouth behind a fan of ostrich feathers. "She looks like she got lost on her way to a parent-teacher conference." "Grant is too kind for his own good," her companion replied. A man I recognized as one of the junior investors. "Keeping a charity case around while he prepares for the biggest IPO of the decade? It is tragic. Really, a man like that needs a lioness, not a house cat." I sipped my water, the bubbles stinging my throat. If only they knew. If only they knew that the crystal chandeliers above their heads, the Wagyu beef sliders they were devouring, and the very servers pouring their Dom Perignon were all paid for by the house cat. If only they knew that Nebula Systems was not built on Grant's genius code, but on the $2 billion of liquidity provided by the Windermere Trust, a fund they assumed had died out with my grandfather. But tonight was not about truth. It was about theater, and the star of the show was standing in the center of the room. Grant looked impeccable in a bespoke tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He was laughing, his head thrown back, radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from thinking you are untouchable. Clinging to his arm, looking less like a CFO and more like a trophy, was Sienna Voigt. Sienna was everything I was currently pretending not to be. She was sharp, loud, and adorned in a red dress that screamed for attention. She laughed at Grant's jokes before he even finished them, her hand resting possessively on his bicep. They moved through the room as a unit, a binary star system orbiting each other, while I stood on the periphery, a piece of space debris. I watched as Grant led her toward a group of potential investors from Silicon Valley. I decided to approach. It was my duty as a wife, after all, or so I told myself. "Grant," I said softly, stepping into their circle. The conversation halted. Grant turned to me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It was a practiced expression, the one he used when the waiter brought the wrong order, but he didn't want to make a scene. "Ah," Grant said, his voice flat. "Gentlemen, this is my wife." No name, no Kara, just a possession. A title. "Pleasure," one of the investors said, dismissing me with a nod before turning back to Sienna. "So, Sienna, tell us more about the projected revenue for Q4. Grant says you are the wizard behind the curtain." "Oh, Grant gives me too much credit," Sienna purred, leaning into him. "I just manage the numbers. He provides the vision." Grant beamed at her, a look of adoration that he hadn't directed at me since our honeymoon. "Sienna is being modest. She is the backbone of Nebula. I wouldn't be here without her." I stood there for a moment longer, a ghost at the feast, realizing that I was not just unwelcome, I was irrelevant. The humiliation was not burning. It was cold, It settled in my chest like ice. "Excuse me," I murmured, though no one was listening. I retreated from the circle, navigating through the sea of fake smiles and backstabbing compliments. I needed a moment of silence. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the ladies' restroom, seeking sanctuary. The room was empty, lined with marble and gold, a testament to excess. I walked into one of the stalls and locked the door. Leaning my forehead against the cool surface, I just wanted to breathe. But peace was not on the menu tonight. The main door opened, accompanied by the clicking of high heels and the shrill sound of laughter. "Did you see her dress?" It was a voice I knew too well, Sienna. It looked like something she bought at a discount outlet in New Jersey. "Stop it. Sienna," another woman giggled. "You are terrible. She is still his wife." "Not for long," Sienna said, and the silence that followed was deafening. I stopped breathing. "Grant is doing it tonight. He said he can't walk into the IPO roadshow with her hanging around his neck like an albatross. He needs to present a power couple image to the board. And let's be honest, Kara is well. She is a baker. She bakes cookies. I build portfolios." "Tonight," the friend gasped. "At the anniversary party?" "That is brutal. It is business," Sienna replied, the sound of lipstick being applied echoing off the tiles. "Grant says she is a burden. She brings nothing to the table, no connections, no capital, no style. She is just a remnant of his starving artist days. He is evolving. She is expiring. So, when do you guys go public?" "Not the company. I mean you and Grant." "As soon as the ink is dry on the divorce papers," Sienna said, her voice dripping with triumph. "Now, come on. Grant is waiting for me to cut the cake." The door swung shut, leaving me alone in the silence. I stood there for a long time. My hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing. A strange calm had washed over me. For 5 years. I had played the role of the supportive wife, hiding my intelligence, my heritage, and my fortune to let Grant shine. I had made myself small so he could feel big. And this was my reward. I unlocked the stall door and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me did look plain, but her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a Windermere. I exited the restroom and returned to the ballroom. Before I could take 5 steps, a hand gripped my elbow. "There you are," Grant said. His tone was urgent, lacking any warmth. "I have been looking for you. Come with me." He didn't wait for a response. He steered me away from the crowd, past the buffet tables laden with lobster and caviar, and toward a secluded corridor. He swiped a keycard and ushered me into a VIP lounge reserved for high-level meetings. The room was soundproofed, cutting off the hum of the party instantly. It was furnished with dark leather chairs and a heavy glass table. It felt less like a lounge and more like an interrogation room. "Is everything okay?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Is it time for the toast?" Grant didn't look at me. He walked over to a briefcase sitting on the table, clicked the latches open, and pulled out a thick document. He tossed it onto the glass surface. It landed with a heavy thud. "Sit down, Kara," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. I sat. I looked at the document. The bold letters at the top were unmistakable petition for dissolution of marriage. "Grant," I looked up at him, keeping my voice steady. "What is this?" "I think you know what it is," Grant said, pacing back and forth. He stopped and looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity, like a man forced to put down a sick dog. "Kara, we have to be realistic. Look at where I am. Look at where Nebula Systems is going. We are about to launch an initial public offering that will value the company at over $500 million. "I know that," I said. "I have supported you every step of the way." "Support is not enough anymore," Grant snapped. "I need a partner, a real partner. Someone who can navigate the sharks on Wall Street. Someone who commands respect when they walk into a room. Sienna brings me status. She brings me an edge. You, Kara, you bring me comfort, and comfort is the enemy of progress. So, I am a liability, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You are a weight, Grant corrected, his cruelty casual and precise. I have outgrown you, Kara. It is nobody's fault. It is just evolution. He tapped the document. I have had my lawyers draw this up. It is generous. Considering you contributed zero financial capital to the company, I am giving you 24 hours to vacate the penthouse. I have arranged a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment in Yonkers for you, paid up for 6 months. There is also a stipend of $5,000 a month for the next half year to help you get on your feet. After that, you are on your own. Yonkers, a 2-bedroom rental, and $5,000. It was laughable. My weekly floral budget for the estate in the Hamptons, which he thought his company paid for, was higher than that. Grant, I said, looking him in the eye. We have been married for 5 years. Does that mean nothing? You are throwing me out on the street for your CFO. Don't make this messy. Kara, he warned, his eyes narrowing. I have a reputation to uphold. If you sign this now, quietly, without a scene, you get the allowance. If you fight me, I will bury you in legal fees until you are living in a cardboard box. I have the best lawyers in the city. I looked down at the papers again. I flipped through the pages. The terms were draconian. He wanted to keep the cars, the house, the art collection, and 100% of the company equity. He was leaving me with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and a temporary roof over my head. He expected me to cry. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg him to reconsider, to promise I would change, to plead for my life as Mrs. Grant Halloway. I could see the anticipation in his eyes. He wanted the validation of my despair. He wanted to feel like the prize being lost, but the tears did not come. Instead, the fog in my mind cleared completely. I saw him not as the man I loved, but as a bad investment, a failed venture, and in the world of the Windermeres, when an asset becomes toxic, you liquidate it immediately. I reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his Montblanc pen. The weight of it felt good in my hand. Kara, Grant frowned, confused by my silence. Did you hear me? You have 24 hours. I heard you, Grant, I said, my voice changing. The softness was gone, replaced by a steeliness that made him take a half-step back. 24 hours, Yonkers, $5,000. I uncapped the pen. The nib hovered over the signature line. You are signing it, he asked, skepticism coloring his tone. Just like that. You want a partner who understands business, Grant, I said, looking up at him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. So let's do business. You want out? You got it. I pressed the pen to the paper. I signed my name with a flourish, the black ink stark against the white page. I didn't sign it as the trembling housewife. I signed it with the sharp, aggressive loops of a woman who owned the building we were standing in. I capped the pen and set it down on top of the document. Done, I said. Grant stared at the paper, then at me. He looked disappointed. He had prepared a speech to counter my begging, and now he had nowhere to put that energy. He let out a short, arrogant laugh to cover his confusion. Well, he said, snatching the papers up, I'm glad you are being sensible for once. It makes things easier for everyone. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that I had bought him for his birthday using a shell company's account. I have to get back. Sienna is waiting for the toast, he said, turning toward the door. Pack your things by tomorrow noon. I will have security escort you out. He opened the door, letting the noise of the party flood back in. He paused and looked back at me, his silhouette framed by the golden light of the hallway. Goodbye, Kara. Try not to take it too hard. I remained seated in the leather chair, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Goodbye, Grant, I said, my voice low and even. But you might want to savor that champagne. You will regret this before the ink is dry, he scoffed, shaking his head as if I were a child making an empty threat. Yeah, sure. Good luck with the baking. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat in the silence of the VIP room for exactly 1 minute. Then I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, a billion lights glowing in the dark. Somewhere out there, my real life was waiting to be reactivated. Grant thought he had just cut off dead weight. He had no idea he had just severed his own lifeline. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. It was time to make a call. The party was over, but the war had just begun. I exited the Saint. Regis not through the main revolving doors where the paparazzi were already gathering to catch a glimpse of the tech world's golden couple, but through a side service exit that spilled out onto a quiet, dimly lit street. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, severing the noise of the gala instantly. The silence of the city street was a welcome reprieve. Waiting in the shadows of a scaffolding structure was a black Lincoln Continental. It was an older model, inconspicuous and unremarkable to the untrained eye, the kind of car that blends into the asphalt of New York. But the armor plating inside was military grade. The rear door opened before I even reached it. I slid into the leather interior. The scent of old paper and peppermint tea greeted me. Sitting on the opposite bench was Marcus, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Grant's entire wardrobe. Marcus was not just a lawyer, he was the gatekeeper of the Windermere Trust, the man who had protected my family's legacy since I was a child. "Did he sign?" Marcus asked. His voice was gravelly and devoid of surprise. "He signed," I replied, leaning back and closing my eyes for a fleeting second. "He thinks he won." Marcus handed me a tablet. The screen displayed a complex web of financial nodes, a digital map of the New York venture capital ecosystem. In the center, blinking with a steady green light, was Nebula Systems. Surrounding it were 12 other companies with names like Apex Holdings, Cerulean Ventures, and North Star Capital. Grant believed these 12 companies were independent angel investors and venture capital firms that believed in his vision. He had courted them, pitched to them, and celebrated every time they wired funds. He had no idea that every single one of them was a shell entity, wholly owned and operated by the Windermere Trust. I was the angel investor. I was the venture capitalist. I was the market. "It is time, Marcus," I said, my voice hardening. "Execute Omega Protocol." Marcus tapped the screen. "Are you sure? Kara, this is a nuclear option. Once we pull the liquidity, Nebula will not just stall, it will implode. There are 300 employees. Those employees will be taken care of. My team has already prepared severance packages drawn from a separate emergency fund," I assured him. "But Grant and Sienna, I want them to feel the vacuum. I want them to understand that oxygen is a privilege, not a right." Marcus nodded. He pressed a single red command key on the interface. "Initiating asset freeze." Marcus narrated the process as the lights on the screen began to turn from green to red. "Freezing the revolving credit lines from Apex Holdings, calling in the demand notes from Cerulean, canceling the bridge loan from North Star, and I am notifying the leasing holding companies regarding the physical assets." I watched the screen. It looked like a city going dark during a blackout. One by one, the financial lifelines that pumped blood into Nebula Systems were severed. "What about the personal assets?" I asked. "The penthouse is held by a trust in your name, leased to him for $1 a year. The lease has a clause for immediate termination upon filing of divorce papers. It is already void," Marcus said efficiently. "The cars are leased through our fleet management subsidiary. The black card is a supplementary card on your private banking account." "Cut it all," I said. "Leave him with nothing but the change in his pockets." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic. As we drove away from the scene of my humiliation, I felt the gears of my true machine beginning to turn. Grant thought he was a shark in the ocean. He was about to realize he was just a goldfish in a bowl, and I had just smashed the glass. The reports from my surveillance team began arriving the next morning at 7. I sat in the command center of the Windermere offices, sipping an espresso, watching Grant's life dismantle itself in real time. Grant woke up in the penthouse, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. Beside him, Sienna was still asleep, likely dreaming of the IPO that would turn her into a multimillionaire. Grant was in high spirits. Today was the press conference, the day he would announce the public listing. He picked up the bedside phone to order breakfast. He usually ordered the lobster Benedict and a pot of Blue Mountain coffee. "Room service," the operator answered. "The usual," Grant said, his voice scratchy with sleep. "And send up a bottle of Bollinger." "One moment. Mr. Halloway." There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched out. "Sir, I am afraid I cannot process that order." "What do you mean?" Grant snapped. Sitting up. "Your card on file has been declined. Sir, we tried the secondary card as well. Both returned a do not honor code from the bank." "That is ridiculous," Grant barked. "It is a black card. It has no limit. Run it again." "We have run it 3 times, sir. Perhaps you would like to come down to the front desk to settle the outstanding balance for the week. We cannot extend further credit." Grant slammed the phone down. "Incompetent idiots," he muttered. He shook Sienna awake. "Get up. The hotel system is down. We need to get to the office." He didn't panic. Not yet. He assumed it was a glitch, a technical hiccup in the hotel's server. He showered, dressed in his Lucky Armani suit, and checked his phone for his driver. Usually, the text message from his private chauffeur, awaiting him downstairs, would be the first thing he saw. There was no text. He dialed the driver's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Fine," Grant growled, grabbing his briefcase. "I will drive the McLaren. It makes a better statement for the press anyway." They took the elevator down to the private garage. The McLaren P1, a hybrid hypercar worth over $1 million, sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It was a beast of a machine, aggressive and loud. Grant walked up to it, pressing the unlock button on his key fob. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder. The car remained silent. The lights did not flash. The doors did not scissor open. "What is going on?" Sienna asked, checking her watch. "Grant, we have the pre-meet with the bankers in 45 minutes. We cannot be late." "I don't know. The battery must be dead," Grant said, frustration leaking into his voice. He moved to the driver's side and tried to use the manual entry. The door was locked tight. Suddenly, the digital dashboard inside the car lit up, but it didn't display the speedometer. It displayed a single message in bright red letters: "Repossession protocol active. Engine immobilized. Contact lessor Windermere Fleet Services." Grant stared at the screen. He didn't know the name Windermere Fleet Services. He just knew the car wouldn't start. "Damn it." He kicked the tire, scuffing his polished Italian leather shoe. "We have to take a cab." The indignity of it was palpable even from my remote location. Grant Halloway, the tech messiah, standing on a curb in Manhattan, waving his arm frantically for a yellow taxi while tourists gawked at him. When they finally piled into a cab, the interior smelled of stale tobacco and pine air freshener. They were stuck in gridlock traffic for 40 minutes. By the time Grant burst into the conference room at Nebula Systems, he was sweating. His tie was slightly crooked. It was 9:40 in the morning. The meeting had been scheduled for 9. The room was full. But it wasn't just the investors. The head of accounting, a nervous man named Peter, was standing at the head of the table, looking like he was about to vomit. "Grant, thank God you are here," Peter said, his voice trembling. "Sorry, technical difficulties with the transport," Grant said, trying to regain his composure. He smoothed his suit jacket. "Let's get started. Where are the representatives from Apex and Cerulean?" The chairs reserved for his major investors were empty. "They are not coming, Grant," Peter said. "What do you mean they are not coming? This is the final sign-off before the IPO." "They pulled out," Peter whispered. The room went silent. "Who pulled out?" Grant asked, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "All of them," Peter said. He tapped the keyboard, projecting the company's cash flow statement onto the main screen. It was a sea of red. At 8:30 this morning, we received notification from Apex, Cerulean, North Star, and the others. They have exercised the material adverse change clauses in their funding agreements. They have recalled their loans, all of them, Simultaneously. That is impossible, Grant said, his face draining of color. Those are convertible notes. They convert to equity upon IPO. They can't just recall them. They can if the company violates the morality clause, or if the lead investor deems the leadership unstable, Peter explained. Reading from a document, they cited executive volatility and loss of confidence. Grant, they froze the accounts. We have negative $12 million in the operating account right now. Negative $12 million, Sienna shrieked. We have vendors to pay. The server costs alone are $200,000 a month. Amazon Web Services just called, Peter continued, delivering the blows one by one. They are threatening to spin down our instances if we don't wire the overdue balance by noon. If the servers go down, the platform goes offline. The IPO will be dead in the water. Grant slumped into a chair. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. The reality was setting in. He wasn't fighting a market downturn. He was fighting a ghost. Get me my phone, Grant ordered. I will call the bank. I will get a personal line of credit. We tried, Sienna said, her voice rising in panic. Grant, I tried to use the corporate card to pay for the Times Square billboard campaign 10 minutes ago. It was declined. I called Amex. They said the guarantor of the account canceled the card. I am the guarantor, Grant shouted. No, you are not, I whispered to the empty room in my office, watching the security feed from the Nebula conference room. Apparently not, Sienna said, looking at her phone. They said the account is linked to a trust, the Windermere Trust. The name hung in the air. Grant blinked. He knew that name. He knew it because it was my last name, but he had never associated it with power. He associated it with old, dusty photo albums and a wife who liked to paint watercolors. Kara, Grant whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. No, she doesn't have this kind of money. She is just a housewife. Grant, we have suppliers in the lobby. The receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. The catering company for the launch party, the hardware vendors, the PR firm, they are all here. They say their checks bounced this morning. They are demanding payment. The chaos was absolute. The phones in the office began to ring in unison, a chorus of alarms signaling the end of the empire. Grant sat frozen, his hands shaking slightly on the mahogany table. He looked at Sienna for answers, for that intellectual partnership he had valued so highly. Sienna was frantically typing on her laptop. I can't move any money, she said, her voice tight with fear. Every account I try to access is locked. It is like we have been blacklisted by the entire banking system. It is not a blacklist. Sienna, Grant muttered, staring at the empty chairs where his investors should have been. It is a blockade. I turned off the monitor in my office. The first domino had fallen. Grant was currently trapped in a glass tower with zero liquidity, a mob of angry creditors at the door, and a fiancée who was realizing that her golden ticket was actually a promissory note for debt. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. Stage 2, I said calmly. Send the eviction notice for the office building. Nebula Systems is 3 months behind on rent. Technically speaking, since I was the one covering it from my personal account. Let's make it official. Understood, Marcus replied. I hung up. I had given Grant 24 hours to leave my home, but I hadn't promised he would have a company to go to. By the time the sun set today, Nebula Systems would be nothing more than a cautionary tale about biting the hand that feeds you. News of a financial collapse travels through Wall Street faster than a virus in a crowded room. By the time Grant managed to get a taxi back to the office, the whispers had turned into a roar. The gray market valuation of Nebula Systems, which had been trading privately at $40 a share just yesterday, had plummeted to less than $4. The sharks smelled blood in the water instantly, and my husband was bleeding out. I watched the chaos unfold from the safety of my encrypted laptop in a coffee shop across the street from the apartment building. Grant was frantically trying to stop the bleeding. He sat in his glass-walled office, sweat staining the armpits of his dress shirt, dialing the one number he thought could save him. He was calling Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling was the mysterious angel investor who had seeded Nebula with its first $5 million. He was the man Grant bragged about knowing, the silent partner who always came through in a pinch. Grant had never met him in person. Of course, all their communication had been through encrypted emails and voice calls. I watched on the security feed as Grant punched the number into his phone for the 10th time. He put it on speaker, his hand trembling. "We are sorry," the automated mechanical voice rang out, loud and clear in the silent office. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected. Please check the number and try again." Grant threw the phone against the wall. It shattered. A fitting metaphor for his career. He didn't know that Mr. Sterling was just a burner phone that had been sitting in my bedside drawer for 5 years. I had snapped the SIM card in half and flushed it down the toilet before I left the house that morning. While Grant was imploding in Midtown, I was busy executing the final stage of my departure from the penthouse. I did not take much. I had no interest in the jewelry Grant had bought me with my own money, nor did I want the designer clothes he insisted I wear to look the part of a CEO's wife. I packed a single suitcase with my comfortable sweaters, my sketchbooks, and my mother's vintage locket. Then, I walked over to the fireplace. Hanging above the mantel was a painting that Grant had detested since the day I brought it home. It was a small, moody landscape of swirling cypress trees under a turbulent sky. Grant called it depressing and muddy. He had tried to throw it out twice, claiming it clashed with the modern aesthetic of the apartment. I had told him I found it at a garage sale for $50 and just liked the colors. I took the painting down carefully. I wrapped it in protective bubble wrap. Grant, in his infinite arrogance, had never bothered to look at the signature in the corner. Nor did he have the eye to recognize the brushwork. It was an original Vincent van Gogh, one of the few remaining in private hands, appraised last year at $50 million. It was the only asset in the apartment that actually belonged to me legally, acquired before the marriage. I placed the wrapped painting in a large tote bag. Then, I picked up Barnaby, my fat, orange tabby cat, who was currently sleeping on the silk rug. "Come on, Barnaby," I whispered, scratching him behind the ears. "We are moving to a place where we are actually wanted." I left the keys on the kitchen counter. Next to them, I left a single penny. A tip for the service. I walked out the door and did not look back. Grant returned to the penthouse at 8 in the evening. He was exhausted, defeated, and desperate for a shower. Sienna was trailing behind him, looking equally disheveled. Her red dress from the night before was wrinkled, and her makeup was smudged. Grant walked up to the heavy double doors of the apartment and pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. The light flashed red. Access denied. He frowned and pressed it again. Harder. Access denied. What now? Sienna groaned, leaning against the wall. "Grant, I am tired. Open the door." "It is not working," Grant muttered. He fished his key card out of his wallet and swiped it. The light remained stubbornly red. "Can I help you, sir?" Grant spun around. Standing behind him were 2 large men in dark suits. They were not the usual doormen. Old Mr. Abernathy, who always had a dog treat for Barnaby. These men were built like tanks, and their expressions were stone cold. "I live here," Grant snapped. "The lock is broken. I need to get in." "I am afraid that is not possible." "Mr. Halloway," the taller guard said. He held a clipboard in his hand. "The lease on this unit has been terminated effective immediately due to a breach of contract." "Breach of contract?" Grant laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I own this place. Well, my wife owns it, but it is the same thing. Actually, the unit is owned by Windermere Real Estate Holdings," the guard corrected him calmly. "The occupant, Ms. Kara Windermere, vacated the premises at 2 this afternoon and surrendered possession, as you are not a signatory on the lease, and your guest status was revoked by the tenant. You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Grant's face turned purple. "This is my home. My clothes are in there. My laptop. My life." Your personal effects have been packed and are waiting for you in the lobby storage room, the guard said, pointing to the elevators. We suggest you collect them and leave the property before we call the police. Call them, Grant screamed, stepping into the guard's face. Call the police. I want to report an illegal eviction. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers listened to Grant's ranting about his rights and his wife's vindictiveness. Then, they looked at the documents the guards provided. They looked at the deed. They looked at the lease agreement. Sir, the older officer said, handing the papers back to the guard, everything here seems to be in order. You have no legal claim to this property. The lease specifies that occupancy is at the sole discretion of the primary tenant. She has removed you. But we are married, Grant shouted, pointing at his ring finger. That is a civil matter for divorce court, the officer said, shrugging. Right now, you are causing a disturbance on private property. You need to leave. Grant stood there, mouth open, realizing for the first time that the walls around him, the roof over his head, and the floor beneath his feet had never been his. He had been a guest in his own life. Sienna grabbed his arm. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into his skin. Grant, stop, she hissed. Everyone is watching. You are making a scene. She was right. Neighbors were peeking out of their doors. The humiliation was total. They went down to the lobby. Grant collected the 3 cardboard boxes that contained his life. It was pathetic. We need a place to stay, Grant said, looking at Sienna. My cards are still frozen. Can you book us a room? I will pay you back as soon as I sort this out. Sienna looked at him. I could see the calculation in her eyes. The power dynamic had shifted. Yesterday, she was the mistress of a billionaire. Today, she was babysitting a homeless man with 3 boxes of clothes. Fine, she snapped. But not the 4 seasons. I am not blowing my savings on a luxury suite for a man who can't even open his own front door. They ended up at a mid-range business hotel 3 blocks away. Sienna paid with her personal credit card, slamming it down on the counter with a look of pure irritation in the hotel room. Grant paced back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. It has to be Kara, he muttered. She is doing this. She must have found someone powerful. Kara, Sienna laughed, kicking off her heels. Grant, wake up. Kara couldn't organize a birthday party without your help. She is a mouse. She probably went crying to some lawyer her daddy knew, and they are pulling these strings. You are right, Grant said, shaking his head. She is too weak for this. She doesn't have the stomach for war. This is probably just a standard legal procedure that got messed up. I will fix it tomorrow. I just need capital. If I can get new investors, I can buy the company back, buy a new apartment, and crush her. He clung to that delusion like a life raft. He refused to see the shark circling beneath him. The next evening, there was a high-profile art auction at Sotheby's. It was the event of the season. Where billionaires came to trade masterpieces like baseball cards, Grant knew that where there was art, there was money. He needed to find a new backer. Someone with deep pockets and a high tolerance for risk. He dressed in his tuxedo, though it was slightly wrinkled from being stuffed in a box. He didn't have an invitation, but he relied on his face. He was Grant Holloway. He was famous. He arrived at the auction house and tried to breeze past the checkpoint. Name, the security guard asked, blocking his path. Grant Holloway, he said, flashing his charming smile. I am here for the Impressionist sale. The guard checked his list. He didn't even look up. Not on the list, sir. Check again, Grant insisted. I am a regular here. I see your name, sir, the guard said, looking him in the eye. It is on the do not admit list. You are barred from entry. Barred, Grant's voice cracked. By whom? Management, the guard said vaguely. Please step aside. Grant stepped back, fuming. He lingered near the velvet ropes, trying to catch the eye of someone he knew inside. Through the open glass doors, he could see the auction floor. It was filled with the elite of New York, and then he saw her, sitting in the front row, Holding paddle number 1 was Kara. She looked nothing like the woman who baked bread in his kitchen. She was wearing a structured black gown that looked like armor. Her hair was swept up, revealing diamond earrings that caught the light like stars. She was chatting with the director of the auction house, laughing softly. She looked regal. She looked powerful. Grant stared at her, his mind struggling to process the image. How was she there? How did she get a front row seat? Then, a twisted logic took hold of his brain. Of course, he whispered to himself. She found a sugar daddy. It was the only explanation his ego could accept. She hadn't defeated him with her own power. She had simply sold herself to someone richer than him. That man must be the one pulling the strings, the one paying for the dress, the one destroying Grant to impress his new toy. Disgust surged through him. He pulled out his phone, which he had repaired with a cracked screen, and typed a message. Grant saw you inside, looking expensive. Didn't realize you sold yourself that fast. Who is the old guy paying for the dress? You are pathetic. He hit send, watching her through the glass. He saw Kara's phone light up on her lap. She looked down at it. She didn't flinch. She didn't look around to find him. She didn't look angry or hurt. She simply tapped the screen once, set the phone face down, and raised her paddle to bid $3 million on a sculpture. A second later, Grant's phone buzzed. He looked down. There was no text, no defense, no angry paragraph, just a single emoji. The scissors. Grant stared at the screen. The meaning was crude, direct, and terrifying. It wasn't just a threat to his masculinity. It was a reminder. She had cut the money. She had cut the house. She had cut the company. And she was not done cutting. "Sir, you need to leave the premises," the head of security said. Appearing beside him, "You are loitering." Grant looked at Kara one last time. She was smiling, winning the bid. She owned the room. He was standing on the sidewalk. He turned and walked away into the night. The image of those scissors burned into his retina. He thought he had hit rock bottom, but as the cold wind whipped through his thin jacket, he realized with a sinking heart that he was still falling. The morning after the auction, Grant decided to fight back using the only weapon he had left, which was the law. I knew he would. A man like Grant Holloway does not accept defeat. He litigates it. He believed that the justice system was designed to protect men of ambition from the vindictiveness of scorned wives. He was about to learn that the law, much like high society, speaks a language that only money can translate. I sat in my office on the 45th floor of the Windermere building, reviewing the surveillance logs. Grant and Sienna had marched into the offices of Bringing Associates, a mid-tier law firm he had retained, demanding blood. They were seeking an emergency injunction to freeze my assets and a lawsuit claiming I had defrauded him of his marital share of the property. I did not need to be in the room to know what happened next. I had already sent the relevant documents to his attorney an hour before their appointment. I could picture the scene with perfect clarity. Grant would have been pacing the office, ranting about his rights. Sienna would have been sitting with her arms crossed, calculating her cut of the settlement, and the lawyer, a man named Alan who was far too sensible for a client like Grant, would be reading the file I had sent over, his face draining of color. "We are going to crush her," Grant had reportedly said, slamming his fist on the desk. "She locked me out of my house. She stole my car. I want half of whatever she has. I want spousal support. I want damages for emotional distress." Alan had cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Grant, please sit down." "I do not want to sit down. I want you to file the papers." "I cannot file the papers, Grant," Alan said, his voice quiet. "I received a packet from the opposing counsel this morning. It contains a copy of your prenuptial agreement." "The prenup?" Grant scoffed. "I remember that thing. I signed it to protect my company from her. It says, what is mine, and what is hers is hers. She was a baker. Alan, she had nothing. That piece of paper protects me, not her." "Actually," Alan said, sliding a document across the mahogany desk, "it protects the assets of both parties brought into the marriage and any growth thereof. You signed a waiver of full disclosure. Grant, you stated in writing that you did not care to know the extent of her assets because you assumed they were negligible. So, Grant demanded. So she keeps her rolling pin and her cat. I want the money she used to buy the apartment. That is marital property. It is not, Alan corrected him. The apartment was purchased by a trust established in her name 20 years ago. It is separate property, but that is not the worst of it. Alan flipped the page. The funding for Nebula Systems, the $5 million in seed capital, the subsequent rounds of investment totaling $45 million. You thought those came from angel investors. They did, Grant insisted. Sterling Capital, Blue Horizon, those are shell companies. Grant, Alan said, the pity evident in his voice. They are wholly owned subsidiaries of the Windermere Trust, and the terms of the investment were not equity grants. They were convertible debt notes. Grant froze. Debt. Callable debt, Alan clarified, meaning the lender can demand full repayment at any time if certain conditions are not met. Conditions like, say, a change in marital status or a drop in company valuation. Grant, you do not just have zero money, you owe your wife $50 million plus interest. The silence in the room must have been absolute. $50 million. It was a number so large it became abstract. That is a lie, Grant whispered. Kara does not have $50 million. She clips coupons for groceries. She has significantly more than $50 million. Grant, Alan said, closing the file. I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney. I handle divorces, not corporate fraud, and given the size of the debt, she could have you indicted for insolvency trading if you try to leave the state. Grant stumbled out of the law office looking like a man who had been lobotomized. He refused to believe it. His ego simply could not process the information. In his narrative, he was the prince and I was the pauper. The idea that he had been the beggar eating at the queen's table for 5 years without knowing it was too shattering to accept. He needed proof. He spent the last of his cash hiring a private investigator, a cynicism-hardened man named Miller, who operated out of a basement in Queens. Grant wanted a background check. He wanted to know who Kara Windermere really was. It took Miller less than 6 hours. Later that afternoon, Grant sat in a greasy diner, staring at a manila envelope. Miller slid into the booth opposite him, looking tired. You are not going to like this, pal, Miller said, signaling the waitress for coffee. Just tell me she is a fraud, Grant said, his hands shaking around a mug of lukewarm water. Tell me she is laundering money for the cartel. Tell me something I can use. She is not a fraud, Miller said, tossing a black and white photograph onto the table. It was an old picture, taken 30 years ago. It showed a stern-looking man in a tuxedo holding the hand of a small girl with wide eyes. Do you know who that guy is? Grant squinted. No. That is Arthur Windermere, Miller said reverently. The Steel King, the man who built half the railroads in Pennsylvania. He died 10 years ago and left his entire estate to his only granddaughter. The parents died in a plane crash when she was a baby. Grant looked at the photo. He looked at the girl. He recognized the eyes. They were the same eyes that had watched him sign the divorce papers. Windermere, Grant muttered. I thought it was just a common name, like Smith or Jones. In New York? Miller laughed, a dry, barking sound. In New York, Windermere is not a name. It is an institution. You married the heiress to one of the largest private fortunes in America, and you treated her like she was the help. Miller leaned in, his voice dropping. I dug into the financials of your company, too. Just out of curiosity, every time you hit a snag in the last 5 years, every time a regulatory hurdle vanished, or a competitor suddenly dropped a lawsuit, or a cash infusion appeared out of nowhere. That was her. She has been paving the road for you, brick by gold brick, and you never even looked down to see who was laying the cement. Grant sat back against the vinyl booth. Memories crashed into him, recontextualized by this horrifying truth. He remembered the time he was sued for patent infringement by a larger rival. He had been panicking. unable to sleep. I had made him tea and told him, "It will work out. Grant, just focus on the product." 2 days later, the rival company withdrew the lawsuit without explanation. He had called it his luck. It was not luck. It was my lawyer's. He remembered the time he wanted to expand into the Asian market but lacked the connections. I had suggested he attend a specific gala, where he coincidentally met the exact distributor he needed. I had arranged that meeting. He remembered the nights he mocked my lack of ambition. "You do not understand the pressure of high finance, Kara," he would say. "You live in a bubble." I did live in a bubble made of Kevlar and diamonds that I had wrapped around him to keep him safe, and he had popped it, beside him. Sienna was reading the investigator's report over his shoulder. Her face was a mask of calculation. "Billions," she whispered. "She has billions." "Shut up," Grant snapped. "You said she was nobody," Sienna hissed, her voice rising. "You said she was a dead weight, Grant. You just divorced a walking bank vault." "I didn't know," Grant shouted, causing the other patrons in the diner to turn and stare. "I didn't know." Sienna looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, she did not see a CEO. She saw a fool. She saw a man who had held a winning lottery ticket and used it as a napkin. She stood up. "Where are you going?" Grant asked, panic edging into his voice. "I need to make a call," Sienna said coldly. "I have a headache." She walked out of the diner. I knew exactly who she called because the phone she was using was still part of the Nebula corporate plan, which I controlled. I watched the log update in real time. She dialed Michael Vance, a hedge fund manager she had dated before Grant. Michael was boring, but he was solvent. Sienna was a survivor. She knew the ship was sinking, and she was already looking for the next lifeboat. Grant sat alone in the diner for a long time. Then, a new emotion took hold of him. It wasn't regret, it was entitlement. He convinced himself that if he just explained things, if he just reminded me of what we had, I would fold. He thought I was still the woman who waited up for him with dinner. He thought he could charm his way back into the fortress. He left the diner and hailed a taxi to the financial district. He stood before the Windermere Tower, a 70-story monolith of glass and steel that dominated the skyline. He had walked past this building 1,000 times. He had never realized it bore my name. He walked into the lobby. The ceilings were 30 feet high, and the walls were lined with abstract art. He approached the reception desk. "I am here to see Kara Windermere," Grant said, adjusting his tie. "I am her husband." The receptionist, a young woman with impeccable posture, typed something into her computer. She did not smile. "I have a Grant Holloway in the system," she said coolly. "Status blacklisted. Security threat level low. Reason nuisance." "Nuisance," Grant spluttered. "I am the CEO of Nebula Systems. Call her down. Tell her it is urgent." "Ms. Windermere does not come down," the receptionist said, "and she is currently in a board meeting." "I will wait," Grant said, planting himself on a leather sofa in the waiting area. He waited for 3 hours. He watched people come and go: senators, foreign dignitaries, captains of industry. They all walked with a purpose. He sat there, ignored and invisible, shrinking with every passing minute. Finally, at 6 p.m, the receptionist called out to him. "Mr. Holloway, Miss, Windermere will see you now. Top floor." Grant jumped up, smoothing his suit. He felt a surge of triumph. She had caved. He knew she would. He took the private elevator. The ride was smooth and silent. When the doors opened, he stepped into a space that was less like an office and more like a throne room. The view of Manhattan was panoramic. The furniture was modern and severe. I sat behind a desk made of a single slab of black marble. Behind me, the Windermere logo, a stylized W, interwoven with a laurel wreath, was etched in gold leaf on the wall. I was wearing a white suit, sharp and pristine. I did not stand up when he entered. "Kara," Grant said, walking toward me. He put on his best smile. the one that usually melted hearts. "This place is incredible. Why didn't you tell me?" "Sit," I said. I did not gesture to a chair. Grant hesitated, then pulled up a chair and sat. He looked small on the other side of the desk. "Kara, look," he started, leaning forward. "I know things got heated. I know I said some things I shouldn't have. The pressure of the IPO, it got to me. But we can fix this. We are a team. Remember, you and me against the world." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. "A team?" I repeated. "Is that what we were when you introduced me as your wife without a name? Is that what we were when you laughed about me with your mistress in the bathroom?" "That was a mistake," Grant pleaded. "Sienna meant nothing. She was just stress relief. You are my wife. Kara, we have 5 years of history. You cannot just throw that away over a misunderstanding. I love you." He reached across the desk, trying to take my hand. I pulled back as if he were contagious. "You love the idea of this," I said, gesturing to the room. "You love the billions. You love the power. You do not love me. You never saw me." "I did," Grant insisted, tears welling up in his eyes. He was a good actor, but I knew the script too well. "I made you who you are. I gave you a purpose." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "You gave me a purpose." I opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. I tossed it onto the marble surface. It slid across and stopped right in front of him. "Open it." Grant opened the envelope. His hands shook as he pulled out the photographs. They were high-resolution images. Grant and Sienna in Cabo San Lucas. 3 years ago, when he said he was at a tech conference, Grant and Sienna buying jewelry at Tiffany's, using the bonus check I had secretly arranged for his company. Grant and Sienna in our bed, in the penthouse, on the days I went to visit my parents' graves. "I have known for 3 years, Grant," I said softly. "I waited. I gave you every chance to be a decent man. I thought maybe, just maybe, you would grow up. But you are not a man. You are a parasite." "Kara, please," Grant sobbed, dropping the photos. "I will change. I will sign a new post-nuptial. I will do anything. Just don't destroy me. We have a bond. Does our marriage mean nothing to you?" I stood up slowly. I walked around the desk and stood over him. "You asked me what your loyalty is worth," I said, looking down at him with absolute indifference. "You traded my devotion for a cheap affair and a moment of ego." I picked up one of the photos, a picture of him kissing Sienna, and held it up. "Your loyalty is cheaper than scrap paper, Grant, and unlike you, I do not invest in depreciating assets." I pressed a button on my desk. The doors opened, and 2 security guards stepped in. "Escort Mr. Holloway out of the building," I ordered, "and if he returns, have him arrested for trespassing." "Kara," Grant screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. "You can't do this. I am your husband." "Not anymore," I said, turning my back on him to look out at the city that I owned. "Now, you are just a line item I deleted." I heard the elevator doors close, cutting off his desperate pleas. I took a deep breath. The air in the office was cool and clean. I had stripped him of his money, his home, and his pride. But I was not done. He still had his freedom, and that was the one thing he had used to hurt me the most. It was time to take that too. Rejection does not humble a narcissist. It radicalizes him. When the elevator doors closed on Grant's screaming face at the Windermere Tower, he did not go back to his hotel room to reflect on his moral failures. He went back to declare war. I could see the shift in his psychology through the surveillance reports. The desperation that had driven him to beg was gone, replaced by a cold, malignant need for destruction. If he could not captain the ship, he would blow a hole in the hull and watch everyone drown. I sat in the dark of my study, the blue light of my laptop illuminating the room. I was not just tracking his location anymore. I was inside his mind. Grant had made a fatal error when he packed his boxes from the penthouse. In his haste, he had taken an old MacBook Pro, a backup machine he hadn't used in 2 years. He assumed it was clean. He didn't know that I had installed a kernel-level monitoring suite on every device in our household 3 years ago, the day I first suspected he was lying to me. I watched the keystrokes appear on my screen in real time as he typed in that dingy hotel room. Subject Project Icarus, Asset Liquidation. 2V Kravitz, at Obsidian Dynamics, com. Grant was emailing Victor Kravitz, the Director of Acquisitions at Obsidian Dynamics. Obsidian was the vulture of the tech world, a company notorious for corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and stripping startups for parts. They were the one competitor Grant had sworn he would never do business with, calling them tech terrorists in a Forbes interview just last year. Now, they were his last resort. "I have the source code," Grant typed, his fingers likely flying across the keys with manic energy. "The core algorithm for the Nebula predictive engine. It is not on the cloud yet. It is local. I can deliver it to you on a drive. Exclusive rights. Price $10 million. Cash. Brigham Associates." I took a sip of my tea. Earl Grey, hot. Grant thought he was being clever. He thought he was selling my secrets to my enemy. He did not know that 7 days ago, under the cover of a shell company named BlackRock Ventures. I had purchased a controlling 51% stake in Obsidian Dynamics. Victor Kravitz was not just a shady corporate raider anymore, he was my employee. I picked up my burner phone and texted Victor. "Me. Take the meeting. Agree to $5 million. Demand physical delivery of the data tonight." Victor, understood. "Ms. Windermere, should we alert the authorities?" "Me, not yet. Let him commit the crime. I want him to hold the knife." The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the rat to smell the cheese. Back in the hotel room, the atmosphere was toxic. I switched the audio feed to the microphone on Grant's laptop. The quality was tiny, but I could hear every word. "Are you sure about this?" Sienna's voice was shaky. "Grant, this is grand larceny. This is federal prison time if we get caught. Theft of trade secrets." "We won't get caught," Grant snapped. I could hear the clink of a glass bottle. He was drinking. "I am the CEO. Technically, I still have my credentials until the board formally removes me. I helped write that code. It belongs to me." "It belongs to the company," Sienna corrected him, her voice sharp with fear. "And the company belongs to her now." "She stole it from me," Grant shouted, and the audio spiked. "She defrauded me. This is just restitution. Sienna, once we get the cash from Obsidian, we leave the country. We go to Brazil. Non-extradition. We live like kings. $5 million doesn't last forever." "Grant," Sienna said. "It lasts long enough to start over," he replied. "Do you want to stay here in this dump? Do you want to be the laughingstock of New York? The mistress who bet on the wrong horse?" There was a silence. Grant knew exactly where to stick the knife to motivate her. Sienna was terrified of poverty, but she was even more terrified of irrelevance. "Okay," Sienna said softly, "but I am not signing anything. I am not handing over the drive. You do it. You are the face of the deal. If Obsidian asks, I am just your assistant." "Fine," Grant said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I will be the hero. You just keep the car running." It was pathetic. Sienna was already building her legal defense, positioning herself as a passive observer, while Grant, blinded by his ego, saw himself as the protagonist of a spy thriller. He didn't see that she was handing him a loaded gun and stepping out of the line of fire. At 2 a.m, the streets of Manhattan were quiet. A black sedan rented under a false name pulled up a block away from the Nebula Systems headquarters. I was watching the security monitors from my command center. The building was dark, save for the emergency exit lights. "They are at the perimeter," the head of my private security team, a former Navy SEAL named Thorne, reported over the comms. "We have visuals on 2 subjects approaching the south service entrance." "Hold your positions," I ordered. "Do not engage. Let them in." "Copy that. Disabling the perimeter alarm now." Grant approached the keypad. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. He wore a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, a comical attempt at disguise considering his gait was distinctive and known to every employee in the building. Sienna stood by the car, keeping watch, refusing to step onto the property line. Smart girl. Grant punched in his old access code. It should have been deactivated days ago, but I had instructed IT to reactivate it for a 3-hour window tonight. The light turned green. The heavy steel door clicked open. Grant slipped inside. He moved through the hallways of the company he had built, a ghost haunting his own graveyard. He headed straight for the server room on the 10th floor. I tracked him on camera 4, then camera 7, then camera 12. He was sweating profusely. He reached the server room. The biometric scanner required a fingerprint. He pressed his thumb against the glass. Access granted. He entered the cold, humming sanctuary of the data center. Rows of blue lights blinked in the darkness. He located the main terminal, pulled a silver USB drive from his pocket, and plugged it in. "Come on, come on." I could see him mouthing the words as he typed in the command lines. He was initiating a full dump of the source code repository. The progress bar on the screen moved agonizingly slow. 20%, 40%. I could have stopped him then. I could have triggered the silent alarm and had the police waiting for him in the lobby. But that wasn't enough. Attempted theft was one thing. Completed corporate espionage was another. I needed him to cross the finish line. I needed him to feel the weight of the victory before I crushed him. "Download complete," Thorne announced, watching the same screen I was. Grant yanked the USB drive out, kissed it, and shoved it into his pocket. He ran out of the room, retracing his steps. He burst out of the service door, chest heaving, and gave a thumbs up to Sienna. They sped off into the night. "Track them," I said. "Do not lose visual." They drove to the meatpacking district, to an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a cliché location that Victor had suggested to heighten Grant's paranoia and sense of drama. Grant parked the car. He told Sienna to wait. He walked into the warehouse alone, carrying a briefcase that contained nothing but the flash drive. Inside, under the glare of a single hanging bulb, stood Victor Kravitz. He was flanked by 2 large men who looked like bodyguards, but were actually off-duty actors I had hired to look menacing. "Mr. Holloway," Victor said, his voice smooth and heavily accented. "You look terrible." "Cut the small talk," Grant said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Do you have the money? Do you have the merchandise?" Grant placed the USB drive on the metal table between them. "It is all there. Nebula version 4.0, the predictive algorithm, the user data, everything." Victor picked up the drive. He plugged it into a ruggedized laptop, scanned the files, and nodded. "Impressive," Victor said. "This is worth billions in the right hands." "It is worth $5 million to you right now," Grant demanded. "Pay me," Victor snapped his fingers. One of the bodyguards stepped forward and placed a heavy metal briefcase on the table. He clicked the latches open and spun it around. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills. $5 million. Grant stared at the money. His eyes widened. For a moment. He forgot about the divorce, the humiliation, the loss of his status. He saw salvation. He saw a future where he was still a winner. He reached out and ran his hand over the cash. "It is all there," Victor said. "Unmarked, untraceable." That was a lie. Of course, every single bill had been dusted with a microscopic radioluminescent powder, and the serial numbers had been recorded by the FBI earlier that afternoon. Grant snapped the briefcase shut. He grabbed the handle, the weight of it anchoring him to the earth. "Pleasure doing business with you," Grant said, a smirk returning to his face. "Tell Obsidian I said hello." "I will," Victor replied, his face impassive. Grant walked out of the warehouse, his stride long and confident. He got back into the car, tossing the briefcase onto the back seat. "We did it!" he shouted, slamming the steering wheel. "Sienna, look at it. We are rich." Sienna turned around and opened the case. The sight of the cash seemed to relax her shoulders. She let out a breath she had been holding for hours. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You actually pulled it off." "I told you," Grant said, starting the engine. "I always win. Kara thinks she can cut me off. I just made $5 million in one night. We are going to the airport, right now. We are catching the first flight to Rio." He pulled out of the alley, tires screeching. I watched the GPS dot of their car moving rapidly towards the Queens Midtown Tunnel. "They are heading for JFK," Thorne reported. "Let them get to the tunnel entrance," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I want them to see the lights of the city one last time before the cage closes." Grant was high on adrenaline. He was speeding, weaving through the light traffic, laughing maniacally. He turned to Sienna, grabbing her hand. "We are free, baby. We are untouchable." He truly believed it. He believed he had outsmarted the system. He believed he had stolen back his dignity. But as he approached the toll plaza for the tunnel, the lights turned red. Not just the traffic lights, but the flashing red and blue lights of 6 interceptor vehicles that had been waiting in the service lanes. The trap had snapped shut, and the bait he had just swallowed, that briefcase full of cash, was about to become the heaviest chain he had ever worn. The flashing lights of the interceptor vehicles did not just blind Grant, they shattered his reality. I watched the live feed from the traffic cameras as the FBI tactical team swarmed his McLaren. He didn't even have time to put the car in park. Agents in windbreakers bearing the yellow letters FBI smashed the driver's side window, dragged him out by his collar, and slammed him against the asphalt. The briefcase, the one containing $5 million of marked bills, sat on the passenger seat. Grant was screaming, his face pressed against the gritty road of the Queens Midtown Tunnel approach. He was shouting about his rights, about entrapment, about being a CEO. He was hysterical. "You are making a mistake," he howled as they cuffed his hands behind his back. "I am the victim here. I was conducting a sting operation." "Grant Holloway," a special agent announced, his voice cutting through the sirens. "You are under arrest for violation of the Economic Espionage Act, theft of trade secrets, and wire fraud." I took a sip of water in my office. Watching the screen, the show was just beginning. Grant was hauled into the interrogation room at the Federal Plaza 2 hours later. He had been stripped of his belt, his shoelaces, and his dignity. He sat in a metal chair, shivering slightly under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked small. The arrogance that had fueled him for 5 years had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. He slammed his hand on the table when the detective walked in. "I want to make a deal," Grant blurted out. "I was not working alone. It was Sienna Voigt. She is the CFO. She planned the whole thing. She made me download the code. She is the mastermind." The detective, a weary man who had seen 1,000 Grants in his career, didn't even blink. He opened a file folder and glanced at a sheet of paper. "Sienna Voigt?" the detective asked. "Yes, she was with me," Grant insisted. "She is my accomplice. If you check the security footage at the warehouse, you will see her. She is probably at the airport right now waiting for me. Arrest her, and I will testify." "We know where Ms. Voigt is," the detective said calmly. "Good, bring her in." "We cannot do that, Mr. Holloway," the detective said, closing the file. "Ms. Voigt boarded a Swiss International Airlines flight to Zurich 45 minutes ago. She purchased a one-way ticket using a separate credit card yesterday. She is currently over the Atlantic Ocean." Grant's mouth fell open. "She left." "It appears she anticipated this outcome," the detective said. "Unlike you, she did not handle the stolen merchandise. She did not drive the getaway car, and she is certainly not here to corroborate your story. You are alone, Grant." I could see the light go out in his eyes. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the intellectual equal he had praised so highly, had used him as a human shield. She had convinced him to carry the cash and drive the car while she took a separate cab to JFK, claiming it was safer to split the target. He had agreed because he wanted to be the hero. She had agreed because she knew he was the bait. "I want my lawyer," Grant whispered. "Your lawyer has resigned," the detective said. But you have a visitor. She says she is the victim. The door to the interrogation room opened. I walked in. I was wearing a white suit, tailored to perfection. Crisp and immaculate, it was a stark, blinding contrast to the grime of the holding cell and Grant's disheveled, sweat-stained hoodie. I looked like I had just stepped out of a boardroom. He looked like he had just been dragged out of a sewer. I signaled for the detective to leave us. The door clicked shut. Grant looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked at the woman he had called a burden, the woman he had discarded. "Kara," he croaked. I pulled out the metal chair opposite him and sat down. Crossing my legs, I placed my handbag on the table. "Hello, Grant?" I said. My voice was not angry. It was not sad. It was the voice of a judge delivering a verdict. "Kara, you have to help me," Grant began, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a desperate rush. "This is a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect the company. I was going to buy it back for you. You have to believe me." "Stop," I said. One word. Soft. But it hit him like a whip. "I own Obsidian Dynamics. Grant, I bought the controlling stake last week. You tried to sell my own stolen property back to me." Grant froze. The color drained from his face completely. "You own Obsidian." "I own everything," I said. "I own the warehouse where you made the deal. I own the car rental agency that leased you the getaway vehicle. And I own the company you tried to gut. You have been dancing in my palm for days, and you thought you were leading." Grant slid off his chair. He literally fell to his knees on the dirty concrete floor. He crawled toward me, reaching for the hem of my pants, but I pulled my leg back in disgust. "Kara, please," he sobbed. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was stupid. I was blind. Don't let me go to prison. I cannot survive in there. I am not built for it. I will do anything. I will be your servant. I will sign whatever you want. I will work for free for the rest of my life. Just make this go away." I looked down at him. This groveling creature was the man who had told me I brought nothing to the table. "Get up," I ordered. He scrambled back into his chair, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "I cannot make the federal charges disappear. Grant," I said slowly, "the FBI does not work for me, but as the primary victim and the owner of the compromised entities, I have significant influence over the sentencing recommendation. I can ask for leniency. I can suggest that this was a moment of insanity rather than a calculated corporate strategy." Yes, please." Grant nodded frantically. "Tell them that. Tell them I was insane." "I will," I said. "On one condition. Anything. Name it." I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a press release. "Tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock, you will hold a press conference," I said, sliding the paper to him. "You will read this statement, word for word. You will not deviate. You will admit to the world that you are a fraud. You will admit that you did not write the code for Nebula. You will admit that you were a figurehead supported entirely by your wife's fortune. You will apologize to me, to the shareholders, and to the public for your incompetence and your infidelity." Grant looked at the paper. It was a suicide note for his reputation. If he read this, he would never work in business again. He would be a pariah. "Kara, this destroys me," he whispered. "You are already destroyed, Grant," I reminded him. "The choice is simple. You read the paper, and I advocate for a plea deal that might get you house arrest or minimum security. You refuse, and I throw the full weight of my legal team behind the prosecution to ensure you get the maximum sentence for economic espionage. That is 15 years in a federal penitentiary." Grant looked at the paper. He looked at the walls of the cell. "I will do it," he said. The press conference was a circus. Every major news network was there. I had ensured that. Grant stood at the podium in the lobby of the Nebula building. He wore a cheap suit his lawyer had brought him. He looked broken. I stood off to the side, watching. My face a mask of stoic grace. The cameras flashed. A strobe light of judgment. "My name is Grant Holloway," Grant began. his voice shaking. He looked down at the paper I had written. "And I stand before you today to confess my crimes." He read it all. He admitted that he was a charlatan. He admitted that he had cheated on me with Sienna Voigt. He admitted that he had stolen the code because he lacked the talent to create anything new. He stripped himself bare on national television, weeping as he spoke. "I am nothing without my wife." Grant choked out the final line. "I was a leech on her success, and I betrayed her trust. I am sorry." He stepped back from the microphone, burying his face in his hands. The room was silent, save for the furious clicking of camera shutters. He had done it. He had killed Grant Holloway, the tech icon. He looked over at me, his eyes pleading for the mercy I had promised. He expected me to step up, take the microphone, and ask the world to forgive him. I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked into the camera lens. "Thank you, Grant, for your honesty," I said, my voice clear and strong. "It takes courage to admit to one's failures." Grant let out a breath of relief. "However," I continued, and the tone of my voice shifted. It became colder, sharper. "While I appreciate the apology for the infidelity and the espionage, there is one matter you failed to address." Grant's head snapped up. I pulled a new document from my pocket and held it up for the cameras. "My forensic accountants have been working through the night," I announced. "We have uncovered evidence that over the past 5 years, Mr. Holloway did not just steal trade secrets. He systematically embezzled $5 million from the company's employee pension fund and charitable donation accounts." The room gasped. Grant looked like he had been shot. "This money," I continued, "was used to purchase luxury vehicles, vacations, and diamond jewelry for his mistress. Sienna Voigt, this was not just a crime against me, it was a crime against the 300 employees who trusted him with their future." I turned to Grant. "Because of this new evidence, which speaks to a pattern of predatory behavior rather than a momentary lapse of judgment, I cannot in good conscience recommend leniency." "Kara," Grant screamed, lunging toward me, "we had a deal you promised. The deal was based on full disclosure," I said calmly, as 2 police officers stepped forward to restrain him. "You forgot to mention the embezzlement. The deal is void." "You set me up," Grant shrieked as he was dragged away from the cameras, kicking and screaming. "You planned this. You are the devil." "No, Grant," I said into the microphone, my voice broadcasting to millions of homes across America. "I am just a housewife who finally learned how to take out the trash." I walked off the stage as the flashbulbs exploded around me. Grant was being hauled back to a cell, facing a list of charges that had just doubled in length. He had sold his soul for a plea deal, and I had collected the payment without delivering the goods. He was right about one thing. He should have read the fine print. With Grant safely detained in the Metropolitan Correctional Center awaiting his trial. The silence that fell over my life was not empty. It was heavy with the dust of settling debris. For the first time in 5 years, I did not have to shrink myself to fit into a room. I did not have to pretend that my insights were Grant's ideas or that my money was his earnings. But freedom, I discovered, had its own kind of vertigo. I spent my days at the Windermere Foundation, restructuring the chaos Grant had left behind, but my evenings were spent in the company of the past, specifically, in the company of Julian Vance. Julian was the Assistant United States Attorney assigned to prosecute the case of United States versus Grant Holloway. He was also the boy who had taught me how to skip stones on the lake at my grandfather's summer estate 20 years ago, when I walked into his office for our first official witness interview. He had not looked at me with the hungry eyes of a man seeing a billionaire. He had looked at me with the soft, sad smile of a friend who remembered the girl I used to be. One evening, 3 weeks after Grant's arrest, Julian came to my new residence, a brownstone in the West Village that I had bought under a trust. It was modest compared to the penthouse, but it felt like a home, not a showroom. We sat on the floor of the living room, eating Thai takeout from cartons. It was a far cry from the 7-course tasting menus Grant had insisted upon, and the food tasted infinitely better. You know he's going to try to plea bargain again, Julian said, deftly maneuvering a piece of broccoli with his chopsticks. He was wearing a gray sweater, his tie loosened. He looked tired but sharp, his dark eyes carrying a weight that I found comforting. His new public defender is aggressive. They are going to argue that you entrapped him with the obsidian deal. Let them argue, I said, pouring us both a glass of red wine. The jury will see the footage. Entrapment requires that the subject was not predisposed to commit the crime. Grant was shopping that code around before I even bought obsidian. I just provided the venue, Julian chuckled, shaking his head. You always were the smartest person in the room, Kara, even when we were 12, and you beat me at chess 7 times in a row. 8 times, I corrected him. Right, 8. He put his carton down and looked at me, his expression turning serious. Why didn't you tell me? Kara 5 years ago, when you met him, why didn't you tell anyone? I looked into the fireplace, watching the flames lick the wood. The question pulled me back to a place I rarely visited. You remember what happened to my parents? I said softly. Julian nodded. He reached out and covered my hand with his. His skin was warm. I remember. I was there when the police brought you to stay with us. My parents had not died in a plane crash as the public believed. That was the cover story my grandfather had paid millions to maintain. The truth was far uglier. When I was 10 years old, my parents were kidnapped from our villa in Italy. The kidnappers were not strangers. They were men my father had considered friends, business partners who had smiled at me at dinner parties. They held my parents for 3 weeks, demanding a ransom that my grandfather paid immediately, but they killed them anyway, out of panic. Before the exchange could happen, I learned then, with the brutal clarity of a traumatized child, that money was not a shield. It was a target. It turned friends into predators. I was terrified. Julian, I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. When I met Grant, I was so desperate to be loved for me, just Kara, not the Windermere heir, not the walking bank account. I wanted to know that if the money disappeared tomorrow, the man holding my hand would still be there. So I created a test, a 5-year test. And he failed, Julian said. He failed, I agreed. But you never cared about the money, even back then. I thought your grandfather was terrifying. Julian laughed softly. And I thought your house was too big. I just liked that you read the same sci-fi novels I did. He squeezed my hand. In that touch, there was no calculation. There was no agenda. It was just Julian. We stayed like that for a long time, the silence between us comfortable and filled with a healing warmth. It was the start of something that terrified me almost as much as it thrilled me. We began seeing each other quietly. We took walks in the park at midnight. We went to obscure jazz clubs where no one recognized us, and we talked about everything except the trial. But Grant, even from behind bars, had a radar for my happiness, and he was determined to destroy it. Grant was currently housed in the protective custody wing, safe from the general population, but not from his own festering rage. During a meeting with his lawyer, he overheard a guard gossiping about seeing the prosecutor, Julian Vance, entering my brownstone late at night. The jealousy that erupted in Grant was not born of love. It was the possessiveness of a toddler who has had his favorite toy taken away, combined with the cunning of a cornered rat. He realized he had a card to play. If the prosecutor was sleeping with the victim, the entire case was compromised. 2 days later, the New York Post ran the headline, "Black Widow's Web is the prosecutor sleeping with the victim." The article was vicious. It cited anonymous sources close to the defense, which meant Grant claiming that I had orchestrated the entire downfall of my husband in order to run off with my childhood lover. It painted Grant not as a criminal, but as a naive husband who had been gaslighted and framed by a powerful heiress and her corrupt government boyfriend. The narrative was absurd, but in the age of outrage, truth is often the first casualty. The public, who had just days ago cheered for my victory, began to waver. Comments on social media started to shift. People called me manipulative, They said I had honey-trapped Grant. They said Julian was abusing his power. The impact on Julian was immediate. He was called into the district attorney's office the morning the story broke. He came to see me afterward, looking defeated. "They are taking me off the case," Julian said, pacing my living room. "The DA says the optics are too damaging. They are assigning a special prosecutor, and there is talk of an ethics investigation." "This is Grant," I said, my blood boiling. "He is doing this from his cell." "It doesn't matter who is doing it," Julian said, running a hand through his hair. "It is working. If I am removed, the new prosecutor might cut a deal just to make the headache go away. Grant could be out in 2 years. "No," I said firmly. "I will not let him win. Not this way. Kara, there is nothing we can do. The rumor is out there. If we deny it, we look guilty. If we admit it, we are compromised. We don't deny," I said, standing up. "And we don't hide. We change the narrative. Grant wants a media war fine. I own the media." I picked up my phone and dialed the producer of The Elena Show, the most watched daytime talk show in the country. I had never given an interview before. I had spent my life avoiding cameras, but silence was no longer a luxury I could afford. 3 days later, I sat on a beige sofa on a soundstage in Midtown. The studio audience was hushed. Elena, a woman known for her empathetic but probing interview style, sat across from me. "Kara," Elena began, leaning forward, "the world has been captivated by your story, but recently, there have been accusations. Your ex-husband claims that this was a setup, that you and Mr. Vance conspired to ruin him so you could be together. What do you say to that?" I looked directly into the camera. I imagined Grant watching this on the small television in the rec room of the detention center. "I say that Grant Holloway is a storyteller," I said calmly. "He told the world he founded a tech empire when he couldn't write a line of code. He told me he loved me while he was buying diamond necklaces for another woman. And now, he is telling the world I am the villain, because he cannot accept that he is the architect of his own destruction." "But what about Mr. Vance?" Elena asked. "Is there a relationship?" "Julian Vance is a friend," I said carefully. "A friend who knew me before I had a trust fund. But we are not here to talk about my dating life. We are here to talk about facts. Grant claims I trapped him. He claims he was a victim of my wealth." I signaled to the producers. "I brought something with me today. Elena, I think it is time we stop dealing in rumors and start dealing in arithmetic." The massive screen behind us lit up. It displayed a digital copy of a bank statement. It was redacted to protect sensitive numbers, but the highlighted lines were clear enough for the back row to read. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is a joint account Grant and I shared. He claimed he contributed to our household expenses. He claimed he was a partner." I stood up and walked toward the screen. "Here," I pointed to a deposit line. "August 2021. Deposit from Kara Windermere $200,000. This was to cover the mortgage on the penthouse." I moved my finger down. "Here, withdrawal by Grant Holloway $15,000, annotated as business expenses. Do you know what this was?" Elena. "No," the host said. Her eyes wide. I clicked a remote. A receipt appeared on the screen next to the statement. It was from a high-end watch dealer. "It was a Rolex Submariner," I said. "For himself, bought on the same day my grandmother went into hospice care. And he told me he couldn't visit because he was working late to secure funding." The audience gasped. "And here," I clicked again. The screen filled with hundreds of transactions. Uber Eats, dry cleaning, a $5,000 suit, a membership to a private cigar club, all paid for by me, all while he was telling his friends, and his mistress, that I was a burden. I turned back to the camera. Grant Holloway didn't marry me. He married a line of credit. He didn't lose his company because of a conspiracy. He lost it because he treated people like disposable assets. Julian Vance is a man of integrity who has dedicated his life to justice. Grant Holloway is a man who stole $5 million from his own employees to fund a fantasy. I sat back down. The silence in the studio was absolute. Then, one person started clapping, then another. Within 10 seconds, the entire audience was on its feet by the time the show aired that afternoon. The Black Widow narrative was dead. Social media exploded. But this time, the target was Grant. The hashtag #GrantWa. The leech began trending worldwide. Memes of his face superimposed on a vacuum cleaner flooded the internet. Grant's plan had backfired spectacularly. He had tried to paint himself as a victim of a romantic plot, and instead, I had exposed him as exactly what he was, a small, greedy man who had spent 5 years spending a woman's money while insulting her intelligence. Julian was not removed from the case. The public pressure to see justice served against the national mooch was so high that the district attorney didn't dare swap prosecutors. If anything, they gave Julian more resources. That night, Julian came over again. We didn't talk about the case. We didn't talk about the interview. He simply walked in, took my face in his hands, and kissed me. It wasn't a thank you. It was a promise. "You were amazing today," he whispered against my forehead. "I just told the truth," I said, leaning into him. The truth has a way of cutting deeper than any lie. I had won the battle for public opinion, but the war wasn't over. Grant was cornered, humiliated, and universally hated. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of enemy. I knew he had one final, desperate card to play, one that involved the only person who hated me as much as he did Sienna. Just when I thought the board was cleared, the most dangerous piece returned to the game. Sienna Voigt came back to New York not with a bang, but with the desperate whimper of a creature that had been hunted. My surveillance team picked her up the moment her passport was scanned at JFK. She wasn't flying first class this time. She was in economy, wedged between a crying baby and the bathroom, wearing a tracksuit that had seen better days. The report from my private investigator, Miller, detailed her last month in Zurich. It was a tragic comedy. Sienna had thought she was running off to start a new life with a wealthy Swiss banker she had met online. Instead, she had been the mark of a romance scammer even more ruthless than she was. He had drained her savings, maxed out the few credit cards she had left, and abandoned her in a hostel in Bern. She was broke, humiliated, and armed with nothing but a grudge, and a grudge is a powerful currency if you know where to spend it. She went straight to the only person desperate enough to listen to her Grant. I couldn't hear their conversation. Attorney-client privilege extended to defense team meetings, and Sienna had wormed her way in as a potential witness for the defense. But I knew the substance of it. Grant was drowning. He was facing 15 years. Sienna was his only lifeline. "She is offering him an alibi," Julian told me 2 days later. He was pacing my kitchen, his face pale. Or rather, a narrative shift. "She went to Grant's lawyer this morning. She claims she was the one who managed the household finances. She is willing to testify under oath that you, Kara, forced Grant to sign those loan documents under duress. That you threatened to destroy his reputation if he didn't agree to treat your investment as debt." "That is a lie," I said, putting down my coffee cup. "And a clumsy one. Who would believe that the mousy housewife was actually a financial tyrant? It doesn't have to be true, Kara. It just has to be reasonable doubt," Julian explained, the frustration evident in his voice. "If she testifies that you were financially abusive, it paints a picture of a toxic marriage where Grant was the victim trying to escape. It muddies the waters on the embezzlement charges. The jury might see the money he took not as theft, but as him trying to access marital funds he was wrongly denied." "And what does she want?" I asked. "Sienna doesn't do charity. We don't know yet, but Grant's lawyer filed a motion to suppress the financial evidence based on spousal coercion. The judge granted a hearing. And because of the conflict of interest accusations from last week, the Department of Justice is putting me on administrative leave until the hearing is resolved. They can't risk an appeal." I stared at him. "They suspended you." "Effective immediately," Julian said, loosening his tie. "I am out." Kara, I can't protect you anymore. That was the moment the fear returned. Not the paralyzing fear of a wife afraid of her husband's temper, but the cold, calculating fear of a CEO watching a hostile takeover. Grant had promised Sienna something. I knew him. He had likely promised her the one thing he didn't have: money. He probably told her about some secret offshore account, some hidden stash of crypto that he would give her access to if she saved him. It was a lie. Of course, Grant spent money faster than he printed it, but a drowning man will sell you the ocean if it buys him a breath of air. I couldn't let Julian lose his career over this, and I couldn't let Grant walk free. Go home, Julian, I said gently. Get some rest. You have played by the rules. Now, let me play by mine. I needed to understand Sienna's leverage. I needed to know what she was hiding. I sent Miller to dig deeper, not just into her bank accounts, but into her biology. Sienna had been seen visiting an OB/GYN clinic in the Upper East Side the morning after she landed. Miller's report came back 4 hours later. It was a single sheet of paper, but it held the key to the entire lock. Patient Sienna Voigt, diagnosis pregnancy, 12 weeks. I did the math. 12 weeks ago, Grant was in San Francisco for a tech conference. Sienna was in New York, but Grant wasn't the only man in Sienna's orbit. My team cross-referenced her location data from 3 months prior. She had spent 3 consecutive nights at the penthouse of one Arthur Sterling, not my fake investor, but a very real, very married hedge fund manager on Wall Street. The baby wasn't Grant's. It was a golden parachute she had manufactured with another man, likely hoping to extort him later. But that plan had clearly failed, or she wouldn't be back here scraping the bottom of the barrel with Grant. Sienna was pregnant, broke, and desperate. She didn't care about Grant. She cared about survival. I knew exactly what to do. I didn't call her. I didn't send a lawyer. I went to where she was staying, a grimy motel in Queens near the airport. It was a place where people went to disappear. I knocked on room 214. Who is it? Her voice was muffled and suspicious. Room service, I said. I didn't order anything. It is on the house. The chain rattled, and the door cracked open. Sienna peered out. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. She tried to slam the door, but I stuck the toe of my $3,000 boot in the jamb. We need to talk, Sienna, I said calmly. Unless you want to explain to Arthur Sterling's wife why you are back in town. She froze. The color drained from her face. She opened the door. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. Sienna looked terrible. Her roots were showing, and she looked thinner, sharper. She sat on the edge of the bed, crossing her arms defensively. What do you want? She spat. Come to gloat. Or did you come to beg me not to testify? I don't beg, I said, remaining standing. I negotiate. I have nothing to say to you. Grant and I are going to win. He promised me $2 million from his hidden trust once he is acquitted. I almost laughed. Sienna, Grant doesn't have a hidden trust. He doesn't even have a hidden piggy bank. He is lying to you, again, just like he lied about leaving me, just like he lied about being a genius. You are betting your future on a check that has already bounced. He loves me, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He loves himself, I corrected. And you don't love him. You love the lifestyle. A lifestyle you currently can't afford. I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a checkbook. I uncapped my pen and wrote out a number. I tore the check out and placed it on the stained nightstand. Sienna looked at it. Her eyes bulged. $100,000, she whispered. It is a lot of money for a woman living in a motel. I said, it is enough to get a nice apartment, enough to buy baby clothes, enough to start over somewhere where nobody knows your name. She looked up at me, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. How did you know? I know everything, Sienna. That is why I always win. I know the baby isn't Grant's. I know Arthur Sterling blocked your number. I know you are terrified. What do you want for this? She asked, reaching for the check. You want me to disappear. I pulled the check back slightly. No, I want the truth, not the version you cooked up with Grant's lawyer. The real truth, the insurance policy. What insurance policy? Don't play dumb, I said sharply. You are a smart girl. Sienna, you are paranoid. You knew Grant was unstable. You knew he might turn on you, so you recorded him. You have something on him, a conversation, a confession, something you kept in your back pocket just in case. Sienna stared at me. A slow smile spread across her face. It was a look of mutual respect between two predators. You really are a Windermere, aren't you? She said. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old iPhone with a cracked screen. She swiped through the files and pressed play. Grant's voice filled the small, dirty room. It was younger, more arrogant, clearer. It was dated 5 years ago, 2 weeks before our wedding. She is so desperate. Sienna, Grant's voice sneered from the speaker. She thinks I am her Prince Charming. I just have to sign the papers, play the doting husband for a few years, and then I can funnel the cash into Nebula. Once the company goes public, I will dump her and we will live like royalty. That stupid Kara is the best ATM I have ever had. My stomach turned. Hearing it was different than knowing it. It was visceral. It was hatred distilled into sound waves. He was drunk, Sienna said, shrugging. He liked to brag. Send it to me, I said. And the check? Send the file to my lawyer first, then the check is yours. Sienna tapped the screen. A moment later, my phone buzzed. I handed her the check. She snatched it like a starving dog. One more thing, I said, walking to the door. If you testify for him, I will release the paternity test to Arthur Sterling's wife, and I will sue you for conspiracy to commit fraud. You will give birth in prison. Sienna looked at the check, then at me. Grant she said. The hearing to suppress the evidence was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a rainy Tuesday. The courtroom was packed. Grant sat at the defense table, looking smug. He thought he had won. He thought Sienna was waiting in the hallway to paint me as a monster. Julian was in the gallery, sitting in the back row. He looked anxious. He thought his career was over. Grant's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Fielder, stood up. Your Honor, Fielder began, we have a witness who will testify that the financial documents in question were signed under duress. Ms. Sienna Voigt is prepared to expose the plaintiff's pattern of financial abuse. Call your witness, the judge said, looking bored. The defense calls Sienna Voigt. The doors opened. Sienna did not walk in. Silence stretched out in the courtroom. Fielder looked at the door. He checked his watch. He whispered frantically to his paralegal. Mr. Fielder, the judge asked. One moment. Your Honor, she was just here. She wasn't just there. She was currently in a taxi on her way to New Jersey, $100,000 richer. Your Honor. I stood up. My lawyer, Marcus, tried to stop me, but I waved him off. If the defense cannot produce their witness, perhaps the prosecution would like to introduce a new piece of evidence that has just come to light. Evidence that speaks to the defendant's state of mind regarding the finances. Objection, Fielder shouted. This is highly irregular. This is a hearing about admissibility of evidence, the judge ruled. If you have something relevant, Ms. Windermere, hand it to the bailiff. I handed over a flash drive, the same drive Sienna had given me. This is a recording made by Ms. Voigt, I explained. It was sent to my counsel this morning. It directly contradicts the claim of duress. The judge plugged the drive into his laptop. He put on his glasses. He pressed play. The audio was routed through the courtroom speakers. That stupid Kara is the best ATM I have ever had. Grant's face went white. He recognized the recording. He recognized the moment. The judge listened to the entire clip. He took off his glasses. He looked at Grant with an expression of pure disgust. Mr. Fielder, the judge said, his voice like ice, your client claims he was forced to sign loan documents. This recording suggests he viewed his wife as a financial resource to be exploited from the very beginning. The motion to suppress the financial evidence is denied. Furthermore, I am forwarding this recording to the district attorney's office for potential additional fraud charges. Grant stood up, knocking his chair over. "She betrayed me," he screamed, pointing at the empty witness stand where Sienna should have been. "That witch I paid her, I promised her." "Sit down, Mr. Holloway," the bailiff barked. Grant looked at me. His eyes were wild. He realized in that moment that he was truly alone. Sienna had taken his imaginary money and sold him out for real cash. I had bought his destruction with a fraction of the interest I earned in a day. Julian met my eyes from the back of the room. He smiled. It was a small, relieved smile. The poisonous snake had returned, yes. But Grant forgot that in the animal kingdom, the mongoose always wins, and I was done playing with my food. It was time to go in for the kill. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan is a building designed to intimidate. Its high ceilings, marble floors, and heavy oak doors are architectural reminders that the law is older and heavier than any single human life. As I walked down the center aisle of courtroom 302, I felt that weight pressing down on my shoulders. I was not the defendant, but in the court of public opinion, a woman who destroys her husband is always on trial. I took my seat in the front row behind the prosecution table. The gallery was packed. Reporters from every major news outlet were shoulder to shoulder, their pens poised to record the final act of the Holloway tragedy. But I only had eyes for the man sitting at the defense table. Grant looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a drab gray button-down shirt that hung loosely on his frame. His skin was sallow, the result of weeks spent in a cell without sunlight. But it was his eyes that held my attention. They were dark, rimmed with red, and filled with a hatred so pure it felt like physical heat. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the jury. He stared only at me, mouthing words I could not hear but understood perfectly. "You did this." The trial had been a grueling 2 weeks of forensic accounting and character assassination. Grant's lawyer, a pit bull of a man named Fielder, who specialized in defending white-collar criminals, had tried to paint a picture of Grant as a visionary artist trapped in a golden cage. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Fielder said during his closing arguments, pacing in front of the jury box. "They call this fraud. I call it a desperate attempt by a man to escape the suffocating control of a wife who used her billions to emasculate him. Kara Windermere is not a victim. She is a puppet master. She watched him struggle. She let him fail. She set traps for him. Is Grant Holloway a bad husband? Perhaps. But is he a criminal? Or is he just a man who tried to claw back some dignity from a woman who owns the very air he breathes?" I sat stone still. Every word was a calculated insult, designed to play on the jury's hidden resentment of extreme wealth. Fielder was good. He made Grant sound like a tragic hero fighting a dragon made of money. But then, it was our turn. Julian Vance stood up. He had been reinstated just 3 days prior. His record cleared of any ethical violations. He looked impeccable in his navy suit, the embodiment of calm, righteous authority. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply walked to the podium and looked at Grant. "Mr. Holloway," Julian said, his voice carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "Let us talk about dignity." Grant shifted in his chair, sneering. "You claimed in your deposition that you were the sole architect of the Nebula algorithm," Julian continued. "You claimed that your wife's money was incidental to your success, yet we have introduced Exhibit C, a transcript from your university records." Julian held up a piece of paper. "You claim to hold a master's degree in computer science from MIT, but the registrar at MIT has no record of your attendance. In fact, the only record we found was a semester at a community college in Ohio where you failed Intro to Java. Is that correct?" "I am self-taught," Grant snapped. "Bill Gates dropped out. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out." "They dropped out," Julian corrected him gently. "They did not forge a diploma to defraud investors. That is a felony, Mr. Holloway." Grant gripped the edge of the table. "It was marketing. Everyone puffs up their resume. Let us move on to the money, Julian said, flipping a page. You stated that you only took money from the company to pay for essential networking expenses. Can you explain to the jury how a platinum diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany & Company, purchased on February 14th, 2022, constitutes a networking expense, especially since your wife testified she never received such a bracelet? It was an investment, Grant stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Jewelry holds value. It was a hedge against inflation. And the recipient, Julian pressed, Ms. Sienna Voigt, was she also a hedge against inflation? She was my CFO, Grant shouted. I gave her bonuses. That is standard corporate practice. Bonuses are taxed and reported. Mr. Holloway, Julian said, his voice hardening. This was bought with funds siphoned from the employee pension account. You stole from your secretaries and your janitors to buy diamonds for your mistress. Is that what you call dignity? The jury was whispering. I saw a woman in the back row shake her head in disgust. Grant saw it too. He was losing them. You are twisting everything, Grant yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. You are just doing this because you are sleeping with her. You are her lapdog. The judge banged his gavel. The defendant will restrain himself. No. Grant stood up. This is a kangaroo court. She bought you all. She bought the media. She bought the prosecutor. I am the victim here. Julian waited for Grant to stop screaming. He waited for the silence to return. Mr. Holloway, Julian said softly, you claim you loved your wife. You claim you were forced into this situation. But we have one final piece of evidence, a recording provided by your former chief financial officer, Sienna Voigt. Grant froze. He looked at the door, expecting Sienna to walk in. She didn't. Not yet. Julian nodded to the bailiff. Please play Exhibit G. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then, Grant's voice filled the room. It was the recording from the motel, the one Sienna had sold me. She is so desperate. Sienna. She thinks I am her Prince Charming. I just have to sign the papers, play the doting husband for a few years, and then I can funnel the cash into Nebula. Once the company goes public, I will dump her and we will live like royalty. That stupid Kara is the best ATM I have ever had. The reaction was visceral. A collective gasp swept through the room. The jurors looked at Grant with expressions ranging from horror to revulsion. It was the smoking gun. It wasn't just proof of fraud. It was proof of malice. It proved that our entire marriage, from the very first date to the final signature, had been a long con. Grant stood there, the blood draining from his face. He looked at the speaker as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. Then, he looked at me. I was looking right back at him. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with the cold indifference of a stranger. Something inside him snapped. The facade of the misunderstood genius shattered, revealing the violent narcissist underneath. You bitch! Grant screamed. He vaulted over the defense table. Papers flew everywhere. He charged toward the gallery, toward me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure animal rage. His hands were reaching for my throat. I will kill you, he shrieked. You ruined everything. You ruined me. For a split second, I saw my death in his eyes. But he never reached me. 2 U.S. Marshals tackled him before he got halfway to the rail. They slammed him into the floor with a bone-crunching thud. Julian had stepped in front of me instinctively, shielding me with his body, but the guards had been faster. Grant was pinned to the carpet, thrashing and spitting. It is my money. It is mine. She owes me. Remove the defendant, the judge roared, standing up. Clear the court. No, I want to speak, Grant howled as they dragged him up. He was handcuffed instantly. Sienna. Where is Sienna? She will tell you. She loves me. As if on cue, the side door opened. Sienna Voigt walked in. She was flanked by her own lawyer. She looked different. The cheap tracksuit was gone, replaced by a modest black dress. She looked calm. She looked pregnant. Grant stopped struggling. He stared at her. Sienna, baby. Tell them we were partners. Sienna walked to the witness stand. She was sworn in. She didn't look at Grant. She looked at the prosecutor. "Ms. Voigt?" Julian asked, straightening his tie, though his heart must have been racing. "Do you recognize the voice on that recording?" "Yes," Sienna said. Her voice was clear, devoid of emotion. "It is Grant Holloway." "And was he coerced into saying those words?" "No," Sienna said. She turned her head slowly and looked at Grant. Her eyes were empty. "He said them because he meant them. He laughed about it. He used to call her the golden goose. He told me that once he got the money, he was going to have her declared mentally incompetent so he could take power of attorney." The courtroom went deadly silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. That was a detail even I hadn't known. He had planned to have me committed. Grant stared at Sienna. The betrayal hit him harder than the marshals had. This was the woman he had destroyed his life for. This was the woman he had stolen for. And she was looking at him like he was a stranger on a subway. "Sienna," Grant whispered, his voice breaking. "Why?" "I have an immunity deal, Grant," she said coldly. "And I have a baby to think about. I am not going to prison for a failure." Grant slumped in the grip of the guards. He realized then, with brutal clarity, that he had never been loved. I had loved him, and he had used me. Sienna had used him, and he had loved her. It was a perfect circle of misery, and he was the only one left inside it. The judge ordered Grant to be seated, handcuffed to the chair. The trial proceeded to the victim impact statement. I stood up. My legs felt steady. I walked to the podium. I didn't have a prepared speech. I didn't need one. I looked at the judge, then at the jury, and finally at Grant. "Your Honor," I began. "The prosecution has talked a lot about numbers. $5 million embezzled, $50 million in debt, $2 billion in trust assets. These are large numbers. They are easy to get lost in." I paused. "But I want to talk about the number 5, 5 years. That is the time I gave this man. 5 years of my life, 5 years of my loyalty, 5 years of waking up every morning and choosing to believe in him." I looked at Grant. He was crying now. Silent. Pathetic tears running down his nose. "Grant Holloway did not just steal my money," I said, my voice rising slightly. "He stole my trust. He took the vulnerability of a woman who had lost her family and used it as a weapon against her. He looked me in the eye and said, 'I do,' when he was thinking, 'I will take—' That is not fraud, Your Honor. That is a violation of the soul." I took a deep breath. He stands here today crying because he got caught. He cries because he lost the game. But he never understood that marriage is not a game. It is a covenant, and he broke it before it even began. I leaned into the microphone. "Grant," I said, addressing him directly. "You said I was an ATM. You were wrong. An ATM has a limit. My love for you had no limit. I would have given you everything if you had just been real. I would have built your empire. I would have given you the world. But you were too busy trying to steal the coins from my purse to realize you held the keys to the vault." Grant looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "Money can be earned back," I concluded, my voice ringing in the silence. "I can make another $1 billion tomorrow, but character integrity. You sold those a long time ago, Grant, and you sold them for pennies. I hope 15 years is enough time for you to calculate the true cost of that transaction." I stepped down. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He didn't look at Grant. In the matter of the United States versus Grant Holloway, on the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of economic espionage, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. The judge adjusted his glasses. He looked at Grant with the disdain one reserves for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Grant Holloway," the judge announced, "your crimes were calculated, malicious, and predatory. You showed no remorse until the moment the handcuffs were placed on your wrists. You bit the hand that fed you, and then you tried to blame the hand for bleeding." The gavel raised. I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole for the first 12 years. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay full restitution of $5 million to the Nebula Pension Fund and $50 million to the Windermere Trust. You are remanded to custody immediately. Bang! The sound of the gavel was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Grant didn't scream this time. He just collapsed. He went limp as the marshals hauled him up. He looked back one last time, searching for Sienna, searching for me, searching for anyone who would look at him with anything other than pity. But Sienna was already checking her phone, likely looking for real estate listings, and I was already turning to Julian. Grant was dragged out the side door, his feet dragging on the carpet. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing him into his new reality. A concrete box, a metal toilet, and 15 years to think about the woman who had signed his name with a smile. The courtroom began to empty. Julian reached out and took my hand. "It is over," he said. "No," I said, looking at the empty chair where my husband had sat. "It is just beginning." I walked out of the courtroom and into the sunlight of Foley Square. The air tasted different. It tasted like ozone and asphalt and expensive perfume. It tasted like freedom. I had cut the dead weight. Now, it was time to fly. 3 months is a strange amount of time. It is long enough for the seasons to change from the gray slush of winter to the vibrant green of spring, yet short enough that the phantom limb of a 5-year marriage still aches occasionally. But today, as I sat in the solarium of my new estate in the Hudson Valley, the ache was gone. In its place was a lightness I had not felt since I was 20 years old. On the table in front of me lay a single document. It was not a lawsuit. It was not a restraining order. It was the final decree of divorce, stamped with the seal of the state of New York. The name Kara Holloway had been legally extinguished. I traced the signature at the bottom with my finger. Kara Windermere. It looked right. It looked like me. Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the rolling lawns where the caterers were setting up for the afternoon party. "The sale of Nebula Systems closed this morning," Marcus said, turning to face me. "The board accepted the buyout from the tech conglomerate in Silicon Valley. The wire transfer has been confirmed." "And the proceeds?" I asked, sipping my tea. "Deposited directly into the new account, as you instructed," Marcus replied. "The Phoenix Fund is officially capitalized with $120 million. I smiled. Grant's company, the empire he had built on my back to stroke his own ego, was gone. I had sold it for parts. But from its ashes, I had created something beautiful. The Phoenix Fund was a non-profit venture capital firm dedicated exclusively to funding female entrepreneurs who had been overlooked by the traditional banking system. It was the ultimate irony. The money Grant had stolen to buy diamonds for his mistress would now be used to help women build their own kingdoms, independent of men like him. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "You have been busy." "There is one more thing," Marcus said, his expression shifting. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a standard prison-issue envelope. It was flimsy and rough to the touch. The return address was stamped in red ink, Otisville Federal Correctional Institution. Inmate number 78,402. "It arrived at the firm yesterday," Marcus said. "I debated showing it to you, but I thought you might want the closure." I took the envelope. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. I felt a mild curiosity, like looking at an insect trapped in amber. I opened it. The letter was written in pencil on lined paper. The handwriting, once so flamboyant and confident, was cramped and shaky. "Kara, they have me working in sanitation. Me, Grant Holloway. I scrub the showers. The other guys, they know who I am. They saw the news. They call me Mr. Billions while they kick over my bucket. I have not slept in 3 days. I am writing because I need help. Real help, not legal help. I need toothpaste. I need soap that does not burn my skin. I need ramen packets. The commissary is expensive, and I have $0 in my account. You froze everything. Please, for old time's sake, Send me $500. It is nothing to you. It is a drop in the ocean. Just 500. I will never ask for anything again. Grant. I read it twice. I pictured him. I pictured the man who had screamed at waiters for bringing him the wrong vintage of wine, now scrubbing black mold off prison tiles while convicted felons mocked him. I pictured the man who wore $5,000 suits, now wearing a beige jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent. He was finally doing an honest day's work. It was poetic. Do you want me to shred it? Marcus asked. No, I said, reaching for my checkbook. He asked for an investment. It would be rude to decline. I wrote out a check. I filled in the date. I filled in the Payee Department of Corrections, inmate account 78402. Then, in the box for the amount, I wrote $1.00. I tore the check out and clipped it to a piece of Windermere stationery. On the paper, I wrote a single line, invest wisely. I handed the envelope back to Marcus. Mail it? Marcus looked at the check and let out a rare, barking laugh. You are cold, Kara. I am just practical, I replied, standing up. He needs to learn the value of $1. I am doing him a favor. I walked out of the solarium and into the garden. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming lilacs. My new home was not a penthouse in the sky, isolated from the world. It was a sprawling estate grounded in the earth, surrounded by ancient trees and vibrant life. It was a place for a family, not a fortress for a dictator. Guests were starting to arrive. These were not the sycophants and social climbers who had populated Grant's parties. These were my friends. There was the curator of the art gallery, the director of the local animal shelter, my old college roommate who was now a pediatrician. And there was Julian. I saw him across the lawn, helping the caterers carry a tray of glasses. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing linen trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked relaxed, happy, and devastatingly handsome. He looked up and saw me. The smile that broke across his face made my heart do a strange, fluttering thing that I was still getting used to. I walked over to him. You are not supposed to be working, I teased, taking the tray from him and setting it on a table. You are the guest of honor, sort of. I like to be useful, Julian said, kissing my cheek. And I like watching you. You look free. I am, I said. Marcus just mailed my final correspondence to Grant. Oh, Julian raised an eyebrow. Another lawsuit. A check for $1, I said. Julian laughed, wrapping his arm around my waist. Remind me never to cross you. Kara Windermere. You never have to worry about that, I said, leaning into him. Unless you try to steal my cat. Barnaby and I are cool, Julian assured me. We came to an understanding. I feed him the expensive tuna, and he doesn't claw my shoes. We walked together toward the old oak tree at the edge of the property. It was massive, its branches spreading out like a protective canopy. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. While we walked, my mind drifted briefly to Sienna. Miller had given me an update this morning. She had given birth to a baby girl last week. She was living in a basement apartment in New Jersey, working double shifts at a diner to pay the rent. The golden parachute I had given her, the $100,000, was gone, spent on debts and a failed attempt to launch a lifestyle blog. She was alone, tired, and bitter. She spent her nights scrolling through social media, looking at photos of my life, consumed by the what-ifs. I felt a pang of pity for the child, but none for the mother. Sienna had chosen her path. She had gambled on cruelty and lost, but here, under the oak tree, the shadows of Grant and Sienna could not reach me. Julian stopped walking. He turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. The laughter faded from his eyes, replaced by an intensity that made the world around us fall away. Kara, he said softly, I have been thinking a lot about the last few months, about everything you have been through, about the strength you showed. I had help, I whispered. You had yourself, Julian corrected me. I just held the flashlight, but I don't want to just be the guy holding the flashlight anymore. I want to be the guy who builds the fire with you. He knelt down. There was no paparazzi. There was no drone flying overhead to capture the moment for Instagram. There was no string quartet. There was just the sound of the wind in the leaves and the man who had known me since I was a girl with pigtails. He didn't reach into his pocket for a velvet box. He reached down to the ground. He plucked a long, flexible blade of green grass. With deft fingers, he tied it into a small loop. He held it up. It wasn't a 10-carat diamond. It wasn't a bloodstone mined from the earth. It was fragile, impermanent, and alive. "I know you have diamonds," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you can buy anything in this world, so I can't offer you riches. I can't offer you a merger, but I can offer you this. It is simple, it is real, and it will only last if we nurture it." He looked up at me. "Kara Windermere, will you marry me? Not for the trust fund, not for the status, but just because you are my best friend, and I can't imagine a single day without you." Tears pricked my eyes, not the tears of frustration I had shed for Grant, but tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I looked at the grass ring. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a symbol of a love that didn't need to be insured. "Yes," I said, my voice choking. "Yes, Julian, 1,000 times yes." He stood up and slid the grass ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled me into his arms, and he kissed me. It was a kiss that tasted of promise. As we broke apart, I looked up at the sky. The first stars were appearing. For so long, the $2 billion in my name had felt like a golden cage, a heavy armor that kept people out and trapped me in. I had been afraid of it. I had been ashamed of it. But now, as I looked at the man who loved me for my mind and my heart, I realized the money was just a tool. It was a hammer to break glass ceilings. It was water to nourish seeds like the Phoenix Fund. It was mine to command, not the other way around. "Are you ready?" Julian asked, nodding toward the house where warm yellow light spilled from the windows and music was beginning to play. "I am," I said. I took his hand. We walked across the lawn, leaving the darkness of the woods behind us. The past was a lesson. The pain was the tuition I had paid for wisdom. And Grant Holloway was just a ghost story I would tell to remind myself of how far I had come. We reached the front steps. I paused and looked back one last time at the gate, knowing that it was locked to the monsters, but open to the future. Then, I turned to Julian, smiled, and together we stepped through the front door. I closed it firmly behind us. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed Kara's journey from betrayal to empowerment as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. It is a reminder that no matter how deep the hole is that someone digs for you, you always have the power to climb out and build a mountain with the dirt. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from the busy streets of New York, the sunny beaches of California, or perhaps somewhere across the ocean in London or Sydney? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Kara's revenge. If you enjoyed this drama, please make sure to subscribe to Sweet Rose Drama for more stories like this. Don't forget to hit the like button on this video. And if you really want to support the channel, please press that hype button so this story can be shared with even more listeners around the world. Your support means everything to me. Until next time, stay strong and invest wisely.